So let's talk about the specs for the Xbox Series X. A couple weeks ago, Phil Spencer gave a lot of details, and I didn't make a video when it was first announced because I just didn't get around to it. But I got a few requests from you guys to make a video about it. You guys want to know what I think about these specs and what it means for not only the ninth generation, the competition between Sony and Microsoft, but the effect that it'll have on PC gaming as well. Because if you just look at the pure specs, if you look at the teraflops, if you look at just the overall performance that the Series X boasts, because they're talking 12 teraflops, variable rate shading, and of course, ray tracing. So on paper, only two GPUs on the market right now are more powerful than the Xbox Series X, and those two cards, of course, being AMD's Radeon RX Vega 64, which runs at 12.66 teraflops, so it has a slight edge over the Series X and its Navi-based GPU, which runs on RDNA 2 architecture. But obviously, NVIDIA's GeForce RTX 2080 Ti is the most powerful GPU on the market right now, which runs at 13.45 teraflops and is also very expensive. And that's the question here. You have great specs for the Series X on paper, but how is that going to translate into cost? I mean, it's boasting more power than the RTX 2080 Super, and that's a $700 card. And then when you go up, because that's about a teraflop difference between the 2080 Super and the Series X. And also the SSD, which is going to significantly increase production costs. Both the Series X and PlayStation 5 will have an SSD, which is great because games will load much faster, and the overall experience will be much better with an SSD as opposed to an HDD. And presumably we would get at least 2 terabytes because they can't do a terabyte in 2020 for a new console. I hope they don't do that. Again, we don't have all the details, but it seems like we should have at least 2 terabytes. And you have a disk drive, of course, because if they sold an all-digital console, all hell would break loose. It would be 2013 all over again with the entire gaming community shitting on Microsoft. So we're going to have a disk drive as well. Add all that up, it's going to cost Microsoft a shit ton of money to make this damn thing and manufacture it. And they're going to have to sell it at a loss if they actually want the console to be affordable enough for people to actually give a shit about it and actually want to buy it. Because it does seem like it has considerably more power than the leaked PS5 specs, which has it about 9.6 teraflops last time I saw. So it's a big gap in power, definitely. But it seems that both of these consoles can do 4K 120 frames per second as long as you have a TV that can actually support 120 hertz. And from what I understand, a lot of people do not have 120 hertz support for their TV. But the fact that the consoles are powerful enough to support 4K 120 is very refreshing because the refresh rates are much higher. And games won't run like shit anymore on the consoles, which is great. But there's a catch to all of this. This is assuming that especially with the Series X, that the 12 teraflops and all that is going to be the base model of the Xbox Series X. Because, again, Microsoft already confirmed that the Series X, it's in the name that it implies, that Series X implies a series of different consoles. So, first of all, the Xbox One X will have integration with the Series X and will kind of be sort of a part of that family of consoles, even though it was part of the current generation as opposed to the ninth generation. And you'll have certain games that can run on the Xbox One X but cannot run on the original because there is a bit of a gap in performance that the Xbox One X can do a lot better in a lot of cases than the original Xbox One that came out back in 2013. But it seems like we're also going to get other consoles that will also be released potentially at launch. Like, you're going to have 2 different consoles at launch. Obviously, they're both going to be part of the same generation, and they're more or less going to play the same games. But the idea is that you might have a cheaper model of the Xbox Series X that might not have as powerful of a GPU, might not be able to play games at 8K or 4K 120. You know, maybe the resolution will be toned down a little bit because 1080p is still alive and kicking, and 1440p as well. So if you say, hey, well, You can't run games at 4K 120, but you can still run all these games, just not as high of a resolution as you would if you got the more expensive model that has 12 teraflops. But I just think that people are definitely overhyping the next generation a bit too much. Looking at these specs, we're like, oh, that's amazing, but that's just on the surface, right? When you look deeper into it, there's the first problem that I kind of touched upon already has to do with price, cost. The price of the console is not going to be nearly as reasonable or affordable as it was last generation if these specs are true and these consoles, and this is what's going to come out at launch. There is no way with those specs that they can sell a console under $500, and there's a good chance that they might go for $600. So that's the first thing, is that the price is not going to be accessible for a lot of people. But the flip side of that is that they're probably going to release less powerful versions of the console that are more affordable and more reasonable for the average consumer. So yeah, you could hype up all these specs, but chances are most people that get into the 9th generation won't even have access to those specs and will choose a cheaper alternative that Microsoft or Sony may provide to them. And that's a smart move because, okay, so the people who are really hardcore about graphics and power, you can, with the Xbox One X, there's a market for that. There's a market for console gamers that care so much about power because, reasonably enough, I mean, the consoles do sell at a loss, right? So you could theoretically get high-fidelity graphics at a cheaper price, though if they keep the paid online and all that other stuff, in the long run, PC will be cheaper. Just think about 4K 120 frames per second, right? Most people do not have, never mind have access to it, like not just talking about the console, but have a TV that can even do that. I mean, 4K TVs are really cheap, but 120 hertz, I mean, usually people who have TVs, they watch their shows and, you know, they're on Netflix and they do what they got to do. Like, they don't really, video games aren't really like a priority for a lot of people that decide to buy a new TV. Of course, you know, there are a lot of exceptions. I'm sure a lot of people watching this video bought a TV specifically so they could play video games. But the point I'm trying to make is most people do not have a TV that can do 120 hertz. So even if they get this powerful console for all that money, they're going to be bottlenecking themselves. So even if they could afford the console, they wouldn't actually get the full power of it because they don't have all the necessary devices that they need in order to reach that full potential. So they wouldn't have 120 frames. Some people don't even have 4K TVs. I mean, their HD is still really big these days. A lot of people still have HD TVs and are happy with 1080p. And 4K hasn't really taken off as much as HD did 15 years ago. So maybe there's a chance that Microsoft actually says, hey, this console is only $499 because we could justify that. We might sell the console at a very huge loss, but we're really banking on these services, Xbox Game Pass, xCloud, everything else they have. We're really banking on those services to more than make up the difference compared to last generation. Like, we're relying so much now. Like, services are going to be the backbone of our gaming platform, and that probably is the direction they're headed in. I don't know if that will be enough to make the difference if they could justify having a console at a $200, $300, $400 loss, because that might be a little bit too much. You know, Sony sold their PS3 back in the day at a $300 loss, the $600 model. It actually cost them $900 to make, but mostly because of the Blu-ray player. And Microsoft actually more or less broke even with the production of the Xbox One. So all of a sudden, selling a console at a $200, $300 loss, Microsoft might not be willing to do that because, like I said, the Xbox One, it cost them about $450 to make it. This was back when they had the $500 console, so a big part of them not losing too much money on it was them having the Kinect being so overpriced compared to the actual price of the console. So the Kinect, you know, they charged basically $100, but it was built in, and you had to have the Kinect to have the Xbox One for like the first year or so of the life cycle of that console. And as far as what this means for PC gaming, I mean, I don't think much is going to change. I mean, people are saying, oh my god, these consoles are completely like blowing off most gaming rigs, and PC gaming's in trouble. Consoles are going to destroy PCs this generation. Well, the first problem, obviously, is that PC gaming's always adapting. So in the next 2 years, obviously the 1080 Ti is not going to be the most powerful GPU, and the powerful GPUs that you have right now are going to come down in price. So is much going to change in terms of the disparity between console and PC? I mean, the gap will definitely be much shorter than it was last generation, or the 8th generation, what you want to call it, because already when those consoles came out in 2013, they were already outdated. I mean, a mid-range GPU could destroy the PS4 and Xbox One back in 2013. So it looks like, hey, at least it's going to be a lot better. So that's great for PC gamers, because our games will not be as dumbed down as they were in the 8th generation, talking about AAA games. You know, they're actually going to have more power at their disposal if these consoles are as powerful as they are. And, you know, even if they release mid-range or, like, lower-end consoles of the same generation, you're probably still going to be able to play the same games anyway, just, you know, not going to be as powerful, but it'll still be enough to hold up for an entire generation, I believe. And any way you slice it, the PC is going to be fine, because let's say, hypothetically, the consoles are going to be very affordable at those specs, and everyone's going to buy those consoles as a result. The console has great games at amazing performance, and people are just buying consoles, and PC sales decline, meaning graphics cards. Those prices are going to come down. So it's a win-win for PC gamers. There's no way that PC gaming will suffer as a result of the consoles getting better. It can only help PC gaming. But there's definitely a lot of hype surrounding these consoles that may be a little bit misguided. You know, assuming that the consoles will be both affordable and that those will be the only options that we'll have. You're probably going to have lower-end options that are more affordable. I mean, that seems like the direction that at least Microsoft is headed in, and maybe even Sony. But those are my thoughts on what we've seen so far with the specs of the 9th generation consoles, especially the Series X. And as always, I want to know what you guys think, so be sure to leave a comment. And be sure to stay tuned for the next video on this channel, which will be a documentary on pornography in video games, so that'll be fun. Thank you all for tuning in, and I'll catch you later. Bye.